Hey guys, I'm Alex Dykes and I'm going to do my best Sofian impression today because I have been able to drive the new Silverado EV in its new work truck format. Sofian unfortunately wasn't able to make this event, but I told him I would film this video for him and for all of you, of course. So let's just dive right into the $80,000 electric work truck. There are a few things to know. First, the price tag, $77,995 starting plus destination for the base work truck as you're gonna see it right here. Coming a little bit later, there's gonna be a less expensive version, but we don't know exactly when that's gonna be on sale. The first thing you'll notice up front is that this looks a lot less like the regular Silverado 1500 and definitely different than the F-150 Lightning. It's certainly a lot more aerodynamic. And that's because aerodynamics are really important for an EV. And that's how they were able to get 450 miles of EPA certified range in this truck. Yes, actual EPA certified. Unlike the Hummer and the Hummer SUV, this one is gonna have a real EPA label on it. You notice we have the blanked off grille up front. I think this looks a little bit more like a Chevy car than a Chevy truck, to be perfectly honest. That's really obvious as we come around the side of the vehicle. Well, you notice the front end really curves in a great deal. One of the ways they get to the greater efficiency and the greater range in the Silverado versus the Hummer truck is this more aerodynamic profile. Obviously also that low air dam right there versus the off-road oriented look that we find in the Hummer. Coming around to the side, you'll notice it looks kind of like a sleek Silverado, I guess you could say. Some folks are going to be upset by the fact that this is a unibody truck. Now, GM wants to dispute that. They say it's a body-on-frame battery blend thing. There are only two categories. Either you have a separate frame or you don't, and this does not. But that's actually an advantage to the Silverado EV. The battery is actually located back here, down here rather, in this black area just below the front door and the rear door area. And this gives us a really low step-in height. So if you come in close, you'll notice that back here in the rear, you actually aren't hopping up quite as much as you would in perhaps a regular Silverado 1500 because of the way this vehicle has been packaged. So there are certainly some advantages to the electric drivetrain. Now, speaking of that electric drivetrain, the battery is some undisclosed kilowatt hours. It's probably 212 like the Hummer, but Chevy no longer wants to say what the battery is rated for. We're gonna have to wait till some of the EPA filings come out so we know exactly how big the battery is. But they are saying 450 miles of EPA range. Coming a little bit later, there's going to be a 350 mile range version, probably the batteries that we see in the Hummer truck and the Hummer SUV. Charging happens back here via this door. You'll see that this does not have the new NACS connector, the Tesla connector that we expect to see eventually in the Silverado EV lineup. It's just using the regular CCS. There's going to be an onboard 19.2 kilowatt charger at the beginning, possibly slower chargers coming later. And if you get the big battery pack, then it will DC fast charge at a peak rate of 350 kilowatts. That should give you about 100 miles of range in 10 minutes of charging. But clearly, if you want to take this entire 200 kilowatt hour battery pack all the way to full, it's going to take a really long time. Now, here in the back, we have pretty typical pickup design. Full LED tail lights, but they're just red turn signals back here. Backup light right there next to the handle, shining right down there on the hitch, which is definitely a practical touch when it comes to pickups. This is going to be much more pickup normative for towing and for hauling than something like the Rivian. Down here at the bottom, we find the same trailer camera inputs that we find in the regular Silverado, also a 7-pin wiring harness connection. This is going to support all the trailering tech that you find in the gasoline-only model. We have a manual tailgate here. I can go ahead and unlock this. You can see what that looks like. I have my videographer's bags there in the back to give you some idea of what this cargo area is like. It's a 5-foot 11-inch bed, so not quite 6 foot long. This bed will allow you to put 8-foot items from the back of the bed all the way here to the lip of the tailgate. And then if you get the optional truck, it's gonna be very expensive, but if you get the RST format with the mid gate, then you'll go 11 feet from the multi-pro tailgate thing all the way to the front seat backs. Kind of a cool touch in the new Hummer trucks as well as this vehicle here is the off-board power capability. If I scoot these bags around, you'll see that we have power outlets over here on the side. There's just over 7 kilowatts of onboard AC inversion. There's a twist lock connector there, some 120 volt outlets there as well. And then you can plug in a breakout box into the J1772 connector to give you an extra approximately 3.5 kilowatts of power off-board ability. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. This is the mysterious breakout box. They're actually giving us one to play with here. So we have a 30 amp 240 volt plug right there on top, 20 amp, 120 volt connectors there, and then you use it by just plugging it into the back. But there is no sort of Pro Power offboard system like we find in the F-150 Lightning. So this doesn't have the automated home backup power that we do find in the Ford lineup. GM has decided to go in a slightly different direction and focus a bit more on this kind of accessory. One possible downside for existing Silverado owners is that things like lumber racks or kayak attachments, etc., whatever you're doing to put cargo in the bed of your truck, it's not going to be compatible with the Silverado EV because the bed is slightly different and the attachment points are different. That means that this is going to be a slightly different kind of truck than the Lightning or the upcoming Ram truck, which are going to use the same bed as the regular gasoline truck. Now, on the other hand, we have a front trunk up here, just as you'd expect in an EV. This has my luggage up front, so you can see you can put 22-inch roller bags pretty easily inside here. There's also another power port up front, which is a handy touch. This cargo area is a little bit smaller than the one that we find in the Lightning, and there's a big reason for that. This hood is not as long, it's also a little bit lower, giving you better visibility. A power frunk lid is going to be available, but in this generation it's manual with an electronic latch, so it just sucks it down there for the last inch or so. Now let's take a look at the inside. Now it's time to check out the interior, and as we do, keep in mind two things. The first one is that this is the base version of the truck, but it's also about $80,000, so a little bit pricey for some of the things that you get in here. The door thunk sounds pretty good. I think Sofian would be pleased with that. Of course, remember that is sound tuned by the manufacturer, so that's just how they wanted it to sound. Now, on the dashboard, we get smaller screens than you'll find in the more consumer versions of the truck. We have a powered volume knob over there, but on the rest of this, as far as the software goes, we actually have the same software we find in the bigger screen. So you can see all the charging settings, those are basically the same there. You can schedule your charging, all that good stuff. In here is where you're going to find the controls for the headlights. That's something that we've seen in other GM trucks. If you want to turn those headlights on and off, that's up here on the touchscreen. This is the control for the one-pedal drive mode. You can cycle through them, turn it off, etc. This is to turn off the vehicle because this does have no button or anything like that. Or I should say does not have a button, does not have a crank key. So this is very Tesla-like. You hop in the vehicle, you put your foot on the brake pedal, the truck automatically starts. When you're at your destination, you press the park button right there on the end of the shifter level, get out of the car, it turns itself off. But if you want to turn it off, you can just press that button there as well. Lots and lots of hard touch plastics all around. So hard on the upper side of the dash, hard on the middle of the dash, hard on the lower part of the dash, hard plastics on the doors over there as well, just as you'd expect to improve durability. That includes a hard armrest over there, which I am a little bit disappointed in. Lots of vinyl going on here too. Vinyl floors, vinyl upholstery for the seats. But on the other hand, we have a slightly larger cab than expected. Lots of headroom. Here's my videographer back there, Alexandra. How much headroom do you have back there in the rear? Looks like quite a lot going on there, so definitely roomy for taller folks. Alex is almost 6 feet tall back there. We have a rubbery storage area for smartphones over here on the passenger side, and then a teeny tiny little glove box below that. We also have a little additional storage on either side of the center tunnel, and because there's no transmission here, this is pretty big as far as the storage area goes. You could probably fit several gallons of milk in there. You can see I've got cameras and other things going on, water bottles here in this section. The only soft touch plastic in here really is this center armrest. Under that, we find the ability to remove that section so you can put even larger items in the center, but we don't have any hanging file storage like you find in the average half-ton truck there. Also, versus the RST, you'll notice that we get a smaller instrument cluster over here on the driver's side. This is approximately 8 inches, and again, the RST is going to go pretty much bezel to bezel for the screen size, but the screens are also going to be arranged slightly differently in the RST. You'll notice that it looks like we might have a head-up display over here, but in fact, that's just their little blinking dots telling you that the automatic collision warning system is doing its thing. So no heads-up display there. Also, no wrapped steering wheel. So this is a urethane steering wheel. It does feel kind of sticky, just as you'd expect in a work truck. Over here, we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control. And then on this side, we have the controls for that multifunction display, infotainment controls. We have the same sort of stock style shifter that we find in the Cadillac Lyriq. So GM initially said that these were going to be exclusive to Cadillac. Turns out that is not true. These are going to be found in the work truck Silverado. Over here we have the controls for the windshield wipers. Down here we have the trailer brake controller. We also have the electric parking brake and other controls right down there. As far as seat comfort goes, I found the design of these seats to be pretty good, but weirdly, we don't have any height adjustability. They just recline, they slide forward and backward. They do not adjust for height. Weird though, we find a 4-way power tilt telescopic steering column, something that I did not expect to see in this particular truck. Lots of headroom, but I suspect some shorter folks will find that getting a good driving position is going to be a little bit tricky. Now, going into the back, where again, Alexandra is hanging out back there in the rear seats. Here's a better idea of the kind of legroom you'll find back there. That front seat is all the way back in its tracks, gobs and gobs of legroom. The rear seats either flip up like this, so you can use some underfloor storage depending on the version of the truck you get, or if you get the mid-gate option, then the seats will actually fold forward into the floor, and then this entire wall between the cargo area and the cab will go down, allowing you to put those larger items right there from the bed into the cab. Now it's time to get the Silverado EV out on the road. Next to me I have my videographer and editor, so everybody wave to Alexandra over there in the passenger seat. Let's go ahead and floor it. We're on a gravel road, so obviously there's a lot of wheel slip going on, but traction is very well controlled. We have 510 horsepower under the hood, but Chevy has made sure that acceleration is not as aggressive as it's going to be in the RST model, because companies buying work trucks for their employees, they don't want them really to go 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. This is probably going to be around 5 seconds even. I haven't had the opportunity to 0 to 60 test it out here because it has been raining all day and it's definitely very, very wet. Now keep in mind that this is relatively heavy. The curb weight in this truck is about 8,500 pounds according to the door sticker, so solidly heavy. It is obviously lighter than the Hummer truck, but we're not talking about a huge difference in terms of curb weight. It does have a bit of a fake engine sound. Let's rev it up here so you can see what that sounds like. I'll go ahead and come to a stop on this paved section. I'll actually slow down there. See, we get that imitation engine noise, motor noise, whatever we want to call it. I think it's actually well done. It's not overly aggressive, but I haven't been able to figure out a way to turn it off in this instrument cluster or in the infotainment system. We do have one pedal driving over here, and there are multiple ways of controlling it. We can get standard one pedal drive, high at one pedal drive, or we can turn it off. In the high one pedal drive section, it's pretty aggressive as far as the stopping. We're actually getting about 170 kilowatts back into the battery, 180 there at the peak. If I drop it down to just off, then it still pulls power into the battery, about 40 kilowatts at this speed, right around 45 miles an hour or so. So it's still going to be putting power back into the battery. As far as the brake smoothness goes, I think this is a little bit better than the F-150 Lightning. Transitions between friction braking and regen braking are really well done, and I like the way that GM has made it so easy to turn on and off the one pedal mode. If you want it on in some situations and you want it off in others, I suspect a lot of folks will just keep it on. Now, clearly when it comes to the rest of the performance numbers, the curb weight of the Silverado EV is going to be a problem. Over 8,500 pounds of curb weight means this is not going to accelerate or stop or handle quite as well as some of the lighter options out there. The Rivian is pretty heavy. Of course, it has a decently sized battery pack. We don't know what the curb weight will be with the biggest battery pack that's going to be shortly available in that one. Expect that to be quicker, however, because of its general design. The Lightning is a little bit lighter than this, but remember its battery pack is significantly smaller than this. I wouldn't be surprised though if this is about the same curb weight as the upcoming Ram BEV, because that's going to have a really, really big battery, even bigger than this one. Its curb weight's probably going to be up there north of this one as well. As far as the rest of the driving dynamics goes, I think GM did a good job. The heavier curb weight helps isolate the cabin a little bit from bumps and dips and dives out on the road. We spent a reasonable amount of time earlier on washboard pavement out on the highway. This does a really good job of soaking that up. It certainly feels more stable and more planted than the Lightning. Part of that is because, of course, this is a unibody truck. Now, I know GM disputes that and they want to call it body-on battery integral or whatever it is that they're calling it. That's not really where I want to go. You either have a frame or you don't have a frame. This does not have a separate frame, therefore it's unibody. And actually, I think that's an advantage to this truck because it feels more solid, more stable, really, I would say more German in terms of its body stability. You go over bumps and dives of the pavement, you don't feel the bed doing something different than the cab. And in a body-on-frame pickup truck, there are sort of three things going on. The frame's doing its thing, the cab's doing its thing, and the bed's doing its thing in the back. And that can feel a little unusual, especially on washboard pavement, broken pavement in corners, things like that. This has a very, very stable feel to it. The downside, of course, is that you are going to get a little bit of extra noise into the cab in some situations. So if you've got stuff rolling around in the bed, there's actually luggage back there in the bed, you will definitely hear that in the cabin a bit more than a separate body-on-frame truck. Also, when towing, you're going to get a little bit more hitch rattle into the cabin than in some of those competitors. Now we should talk about range. GM says over 450 miles of range, and actually, I believe him. And that's thanks to the enormous battery pack. Again, they won't tell us exactly how big this battery is, but we've been averaging over 2 miles per kilowatt hour, so significantly more efficient than the last time I drove the Hummer truck. And that's thanks to the greater aerodynamics that we find in the Silverado EV. This has a narrow profile, it has a relatively smooth underbody, definitely a lot of focus on aerodynamics, certainly more than we find in the F-150 Lightning. Speaking of the Lightning, if you didn't know, since you're watching Sofian's channel, not mine, we actually owned a Rivian and a Lightning at the same time as long-term test vehicles, and they certainly averaged different numbers. The Rivian was more efficient in real-world driving than we'd expected, the Lightning less efficient in real-world driving than we expected. Even though the EPA numbers for this vehicle have not been officially released, I wouldn't be surprised if out on the highway, this was 20% more efficient than the Lightning. And that really seems to be where GM has focused their efforts, is highway efficiency in the Silverado. And that's gonna help you out not just at 65 or 75 miles an hour out on the open highway, but also when towing at some of those higher speeds. So they're claiming that this will get solidly greater range when towing and out on the open highway than the Lightning. Now clearly when towing, that range is going to drop way down. Chevy says that the software will automatically cut your expected range in half the moment you have any trailer connected to the back. But it is interesting that they're not doing any of that sort of cloud data predictive trailering thing that we find in the Ford lineup. Bottom line for me out on the road at the moment, this actually feels a little bit more like a big SUV than a traditional big truck. And for me at least, that's actually an asset because it feels more refined than the regular Silverado 1500. I think it actually is a little bit quieter out on the road than the last 1500 that I drove as well, but it also gives you all the capability you'd expect in a Silverado with an electric drivetrain. Today, Chevy gave us some good news and some bad news. On the good news front, towing capacity is way up from expectations. 10,000 pounds of towing capability in the work truck version. Initially, they'd only announced 8,000 pounds of capability. On the other hand, they wouldn't talk about the max tow package that they had mentioned in the initial press releases. Theoretically, that could give the Silverado up to 20,000 pounds of towing capability, which would really put this in an entirely different category than the competition. They wouldn't talk about it on the pro or con side, so who knows, maybe it's coming at some point in the future. But one thing that is absolutely not coming is a sub $40,000 Silverado EV. They said that that model is absolutely gone. Commodity prices, cost of manufacturing, everything like that is up. So we don't know what the base price of the consumer or the fleet version of the truck will be. Again, this is fleet only. So at the moment, $77,995 for the fleet only version plus destination, basically $80,000 for this truck. Coming a little bit later, there's gonna be a $72,000 approximately version. It's gonna give you 350 miles of range. At some later date, there's gonna be the RST First Edition, a whopping $105,000. You're gonna get extra style in that model. You'll get the mid-gate, you'll get the multi-pro tailgate thing. Again, whatever Chevy is calling that particular option in their truck lineup, and a bunch of other features on that first edition model as well, including 754 horsepower. So definitely a different kind of truck than we get here in the work truck version. Let me know what you think about this down there in the comments section. I am a little bit torn. I like the way that it tows, I like the way that it drives, but it is fantastically expensive for a work truck. $105,000 is fantastically expensive for any truck. So this is really going to be topping the limits of what trucks cost. On the other hand, it's the only truck that will give you 450 miles of range, and in real world driving, solid 400 miles of range is absolutely possible. If you didn't know it already, I actually owned a Lightning and a Rivian. I think I talked about in the drive section. Sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I owned a Rivian and a Lightning for a while as test vehicles. They didn't really get their rated fuel economy, especially out on the highway. And with the Silverado, Chevy was really focused on the highway efficiency scores for this vehicle. So I suspect it's going to be a lot closer to that number thanks to the aero improvements that we find in this. Since it's not a body-on-frame vehicle, they were better able to really give us a better aero profile under the vehicle. They really changed that front end look versus the Silverado, etc. And all of that is likely going to give this better range. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and subscribe if you haven't already done to Redline. They've got merch everywhere, etc. If you want to find me, you can find me over at EV Buyer's Guide, Auto Buyer's Guide, and Alex on Autos as well. And maybe I'll see you in the next video, hopefully with Sofian in the passenger seat or me in the driver's seat or whatever, I don't know, vice versa. Somebody in somebody's passenger seat and driver's seat. See all of you next week. Originally announced. Rob, if you use any of these goof-offs, then I'm going to come after you with a knife. I will find you. Start again.